Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Janie Brooks-Heuck, the Managing Director of Brooks Winery, and we are here today to celebrate another Beyond Brooks. I'm super excited today. We have great guests that I've had the privilege to not only meet, but see their facility. Super excited. We have a lot of really fun connections that we're going to talk about throughout the program today, and we're excited. So plan on 70 minutes or so of time, and we'll finish in the lounges like we do every week. And we must start with a toast, as we always do. So everybody raise a glass, or raise your coffee if you want to. But it's important to start with this toast to continually live through the lens of others' passions and connect with our community and their craft. Cheers. And today we are connecting with our friends at Nossa Familia Coffee. It's going to be such a blast. Great story, great values, really mission aligned with everything that we do at Brooks. And we're going to learn a lot. So I'm super excited about that. And as always, I want to introduce and have her come up on stage here in a minute, Brie Boskov, who is Brie Stock, sorry, Bree. Been married for years now. Dear friend of mine, she is a master of wine. She is also the head of education for the Oregon Wine Board, puts on amazing events and educational webinars for all of us in not only the Oregon wine community, but she does them worldwide to get the message of Oregon wine out in front of trade and media people across the world. She's also, and we haven't talked about this before, but a part of her side job is to actually make wine. So Bree is also a winemaker, so she brings that great contribution to what we do. And her and I got together when COVID first started, which was over a year ago, so hard to believe, and really tried to plan some sort of idea and event that we thought could really be different, that could be educational, introduce the Brooks fans to partners with the aligned missions and vice versa. And so Beyond Brooks has been our baby now. I think this is our 5th one, and we have 3 left to go in this season. So sit back, sip your wine. You now have permission to drink. Now that we've done the toast, we won't be getting into the tasting for a good half hour. And I will see you back then. Your turn, you're up.
Thank you, Janie, and always happy to be here on a almost sunny Saturday out here in the Willamette Valley and the Yosemite Hills AVA. And as Janie mentioned, when we started planning these events and discussing the possibility of bringing people together, we also wanted to focus on something that is very important to both Janie and myself and the Brooks philosophy, which is a giving component to our programs. So we have, I always go the wrong way. There we go. We do have the Assemblage Women and Diversity in Wine Symposium and organization that receives benefits from each and every one of the purchases that you make for this series. Assemblage is a symposium that was held in January last year in the Willamette Valley, and then sadly we have not returned to an in-person symposium for them, but they are incredibly active in the local wine community in terms of providing mentorship, education, advancement and empowerment of women and diverse communities in our local wine industry and beyond. So we're very happy to have them as our giving partner for this program. Quickly, I'm just going to touch on some housekeeping for everyone. If you do happen to find that your screen freezes or something is a little delayed or wacky, just hit the refresh button in your browser window, and that refresh browser button looks like a little circle with an arrow on it. So if you just hit that, that will help the program reset, and you should be okay. But if you do have any technical issues beyond that, you can put the link into troubleshooting in the chat, and we can, or just, go into the chat and we can help you out. Our tech people will help you out. That is not me. I didn't even know what a browser button was. So someone else will be helping you with that. But so far, we've had some pretty good success rates of everyone being able to view the entire program. I know that this group in particular, between Janie and Jimmy having gone to Beaverton High School, and Augusto's children who are at Beaverton High School at the moment. I know we have some folks on from the high school and from past alumni. So please get active in the chat and chat to each other from, I guess, Beaverton or all over the country. But also, if you do have questions specifically for Janie, Augusto, Rob, or myself, we will address those in the Q&A section. So please put them in the Q&A section. And then if you do see a question in the Q&A section where you feel like, oh, that's a great question, I really want that one answered, please click on it and vote on it. And that means that it'll take it to the top of the Q&A question forum, and it means it's more likely that I'm going to see that and will answer that first. So however, desperate you are to hear that question, make sure you vote on it and it'll go up to the top there. Again, using the help in chat for any issues that you have, technical or otherwise, and we'll do our best to solve those for you. If you are on an iPad or an iPhone, you can only view the presentation that we're giving today. You won't actually be able to interact in the chat and the Q&A, and you won't have access to the very fun happy hour that we do at the end of the seminar, which is in the lounge. So we're going to have a few lounges up today. Augusto will have one, Rob will have one, and Janie and myself will have a lounge. So pop on in, say hi, make sure you remind us to do a photo booth so you can remember the event and everyone in it and the people that you met. Just to touch on the agenda again, Janie did mention that she gave the toast, and that means that you are free to imbibe throughout the event, and you can start that anytime. But I'm not going to get to tasting and talking specifically about the wines for about 30 minutes. So make sure you don't imbibe too swiftly. You might need that coffee really badly if you do. A reminder for glassware, I like to have 2 glasses when I have 2 Pinot Noirs next to each other so that I can compare them, I can smell them side by side and see what different aromas and flavors I'm getting off both of them, especially since these 2 wines are very distinctive. Even though they're the same grape variety, Pinot Noir, they are different clones and they're from different parts of the Willamette Valley and have just different aspects, different impacts from wind and weather. So they are really quite distinctive. So I like to have 2 glasses for that as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the program, we will all jump into the lounges. So you will just have to leave the stage and then go onto the lounge site, which will have Janie listed as a host, Augusto and Rob listed as hosts of lounge, and myself as well. So come on in and say hi and catch up if I haven't seen you in a while. And then at the top of your screen, you have web links to both Nossa Familia and the Brooks tasting room. So you can jump onto either site just by clicking on either of those links, and that will take you right to the website of Brooks or Nossa Familia, and you can order online immediately. So what really blew us away today was that, we often sourced or began looking for local partners for our products for our product packs from people that we either admired or had a lot of familiarity with in terms of purchasing their product in the past. And then also from B Corps. And so it was actually funny for Janie and I to reflect on the list that we both came back with. We both wrote down these big lists of, who would you like to, do a seminar with, what products? And it was funny that that, we came back with so many of the same producers, but also that so many of those producers were also B Corps, and began as small family-owned companies, and were, pretty environmentally friendly as well. So it just goes to show, when you have a philosophy about something, it tends to flow through all of the work that you do. And so this was how we landed with Nossa Familia Coffee, who are local in Portland here. But it wasn't really until I reached out to Augusto and Julie, his amazing sales director as well, sales and marketing, who helped me connect some pieces. And once I started talking to them both, I realized how much more connectivity and intersectionality there happens to be between the two companies. Janie obviously took over from her brother Jimmy, and Pascal, who's now in France working in the wine industry. Really family-owned companies where the family is still very much involved. And Augusto and the Carneiro family is very much involved in farming of coffee beans, and as well as the production aspect here in the US. But then beyond that, once we went and visited Augusto at the roastery in Portland, we started talking about how the coffee plant grows, and there was so many lights going off about, wow, this is so similar to what we think about when we're selecting a place to grow a vineyard, and what contributes to quality, small quality production of a very superior product. And so Augusto was mentioning the differences between elevation levels when he was talking about flavor profiles. And that's one of the very first things that, when you come to a wine region or you're tasting in a masterclass, you're often really beginning to think about, I'll ask the questions about, what elevation does this vineyard sit at? What aspect of slope is this vineyard on? Is it east facing? Is it west facing? What are some of the weather impacts that, change the flavor and the profile of these products? And I had no idea really how connected wine and coffee was, beyond the obvious of both having a lot of, very aromatic flavors, and me requiring both of them in my life to function correctly. So with that, I would really like to welcome up to the stage Augusto Carneiro of Nossa Familia Coffee to tell us his story.
All right.
Welcome, Augusto.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to this. It was really hard to choose what to drink. So I have coffee in one hand, and this is a beautiful mug made by my mom in Brazil, and she's joining us. We have guests from Brazil today, and then wine. So I'm double-fisted and ready to go.
Fantastic. Augusto, you have such a rich backstory about how you began Nossa Familia here in Portland, but it really begins back home in Brazil, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of your family's properties and how you ended up with Nossa Familia?
Certainly, of course. So yeah, my family started growing coffee in the 1890s. So that's like 1800s, which is crazy, right? Before cars, before lots of things. And it was my great-great-grandfather and his 4 brothers that started it in the southeastern part of Brazil. And we'll have a slideshow with a few photos of the farm. And, growing up, we'd spend all our holidays at the farm, and coffee farms look a lot like vineyards, similar terrain with rolling hills. And it's a tradition that's been passed down. We are onto the 5th generation now, with one of my cousins running one of the farms. And actually there's one of the farms, like we're into what would be the 6th generation of coffee farming, which is really cool. And the area we're in is really rich soil. It's pretty close to São Paulo, about a 4-hour drive from São Paulo in the southeast of Brazil. It's the Brazilian geography is really ancient. And so there's not like, we're on a volcanic soil, but you can't see that it's a volcano because it's been inactive for millions of years. But it really is from like Google Earth, you can actually see the volcano crater, and we're right on the edge of that. So I feel really lucky that my family 100 years ago settled in this beautiful area that's just perfect for really great coffee. It's a really nice altitude, ranging between 900 to 1,200 meters. So, about 3,500 feet. Yeah.
So so volcanic soil here in the Willamette Valley as well, and for most of the west coast of the US, wine growing regions as well. But the one big difference, I guess, between being able to grow grapes or high quality grapes and being able to grow high quality coffee is where you're situated on the in regards to the equator, right? So wine being located at that sort of 30 to 50th parallels, and then coffee needing to be closer to a warmer area. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah. So the coffee plant cannot tolerate freezing weather. So if there's a strong frost, it kills off the coffee plant, unfortunately. And so it's this fine balance of how high can you go in elevation without the plant freezing. So it's one of the reasons when you get to Colombia or some of the Central American countries or Africa, some of the countries that are very close to the equator, you can have coffee that's grown at 2,000 meters of elevation. But where we are, my family is closer to the line of the tropics. So if we get much more above like 1,500 meters, then we will get frost, and then we can't grow. And even in the area where we are, it's very strategic because we do get frost in the valleys. So coffee is planted on the slopes because if you're in the valleys, that's where the dew settles, and then that'll get frost. And some of it is just learned experience where they tried to plant, and then you get a big frost. Like, okay, that spot is not for coffee. That's pasture for cattle or some other crop.
Yeah, that's so similar to wine grapes as well. You see most of the most important vineyard regions in the world are often located on slopes, that are, 10 to 30 degree slopes. And rarely do you see quality wine production coming from the valley floor of a region because it's usually going to get frosted, or the soil down there is going to be too vigorous and it's not going to make detailed concentrated wines. So having those sloped sites and having that airflow is hugely important to vineyards as well. I love how much crossover there is between coffee growing and fine coffee making and fine wine making as well. I just had no idea. So
yeah. We prepared a few photos to share with folks. So on the top left there is my ancestors who started the farm way back when. On the top right is the school at the farm. So that's where my grandfather Ernesto went to school right around 1930 something, and that school was active for many years. And on the top left, bottom left, you can see the wine planted kind of like hedges. Again, very similar to a wine scenery. And the farms in Brazil and most coffee farms you visit are just lush and beautiful scenery. On the bottom right, you have the map, so you can see where Rio and São Paulo are, and this is the southeast of Brazil. And the red dot, Fazenda Cachoeira, that's one of the coffee farms. So my great-grandparents had 13 kids, and so the family was a successful in fertilization with land and kids, and so there's a big family, and they did well in business. And bought more land, and so now there's 5 farms that are considered part of what we call our family of farms. So it's a cousin, a second cousin, or uncle that are running it. So Fazenda Cachoeira is one of them. Fazenda Recreio, which I'll be talking about, is another one of them as well. I moved to Portland in 1996 to go to college, and I had every intention of going back to Brazil. I love Brazil, but then I met my wife, stayed behind. And I worked as an engineer. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Portland, but hated engineering. And I was like, what can I do that will be more engaging, that will allow me to visit Brazil more often? And luckily, one of my cousins in Brazil had started an export company and a roastery. And so I flew back from Brazil with a box of 70 pounds of coffee and gave some away. And this was like early 2004. And I was kind of intimidated. There's already a few really good companies back then. Stumptown was starting to enter their heyday, where they're like, all over the place and very dominating in the local scene. But people love their coffee, and they couldn't believe. They're like, wait, this is from like your family has a coffee farm? That's so cool. And I realized, in Portland and more around the world, people want to know where their product comes from. They want to know that there's an authentic a connection to the land and the people that are doing the work. And so we started slowly and surely. And so like even the name of the company it's not very creative. Nossa Familia just means our family in Portuguese. We can go to the next slide.
It sounds so exotic though, Augusto, really.
Yeah, it's I feel really lucky to be part of both these worlds, right? I get to go back and be at home in Brazil and get to call Portland and the Willamette Valley home as well. So a few more photos here. So at the bottom left is Fazenda Cachoeira. Again, you can see beautiful, lush coffee plants growing. On the top left are two of my uncles that are taking over the farm. And then the one, Diogo, is the one brewing the coffee. So him and I, our birthdays are really close together. He's a cousin to the third degree, and he's taken over one of the coffee farms. And he's been responsible for bringing in, fresh energy into coffee farming. And I think a lot like wine and other industries, new generations come in and they just bring in fresh ideas. So it's been really fun to grow in parallel with my cousin Diogo. So this was a great day. I was visiting the farm and he was brewing some special lots that he was very proud of. I'm going to talk a little bit about the company and what we stand for. So with my family having done this beautiful job of growing this farm and having a sustainability focus, before sustainability was even a marketing term, we really wanted to start something that would have a deeper meaning. So the purpose of Nossa Familia, what we talk to our staff and our customers and our friends about, is that we want to deliver exceptional farm direct coffee and create positive relationships locally and globally. And so to us, that means we're paying a fair price to the farmers, whether it's my family or other folks we've started working with. And it's interesting because in the beginning, some people would come up to me like, oh, you must get a great deal on the coffee. And I'd be like, well, I get good terms. And most importantly, I get like to pick the cream of the crop, but mostly like, it's not about getting a great price. I actually want to pay more to the farmer because they're my family. So we really want it to be, it's not this I win, you lose. I think there's a big win-win component. And that's why we joined the B Corp movement, So we believe that business can be a force for good. We can have profits, we can have focus on people, whether it's the people that we work with or our staff in Portland and our customers, and take care of the planet as well. So it's a pretty rich story. It's a rich mission, and it's a privilege to be here, and it's a fun industry to be in.
Yeah, there's so many connections to Brooks' values with what you do as well, and really to even how we're here doing this Beyond Brooks program today is that, we have a sense of purpose and we want to engage with our community and we want to tell other people's stories who are doing great things and, live by the same values that we all do as well. And, I remember, Jimmy Brooks, really was the first person to bring biodynamic farming to the Willamette Valley, all those years ago before, like you say, sustainability was a marketing word or so many great connections. And I it's funny because I chose the wines a little as well, based off of the similarities between some of the coffee profiles as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what's in the box before we get into talking about the wine and the coffee?
Sure. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. One of the things I like to tell you really quick about sustainability is I feel like in my family, the word was broken into the ability to sustain, right? So it really was taking care of the land and the business in a way that we would sustain for the next generation. All right, so what's in the box? This good-looking gentleman to the right is Teodoro. He's my uncle who's actually, that's Rob who just waved with the beard. Also very good-looking.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then Rob's one of the reasons our coffee tastes so good. He's the one that transforms it from, well, he helps us curate our coffee program and then helps us set all the roasting profiles. The other gentleman who's sipping a little espresso cup is Teodoro, and he was a farmer for 20 years and then became an artist. And I have a lot of artists in the family. My grandmother, Augusto, is also an artist. She painted these little mugs little espresso cups that I have my coffee samples in.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
Anyway, so Teodoro, we named our medium dark after Teodoro. So it's our Teodoro's Italian roast. For a while, we called it a rich, seductive experience, which was really funny when we were in Brazil. He was like self-proclaimed sex symbol for Nossa Familia. We had a big laugh at that at the dinner table. And this is a super fun, and we sell Teodoro in full bags of coffee as well, but we thought it would be really fun to share this product, the steeped bags. This is great for camping or traveling, or if you just want to make a cup of coffee for yourself. It's very much like a coffee in a tea bag. So the difference is you want to steep it for a good 5 minutes so that you really extract the coffee well. You want to preheat your mug. And I'll let Rob talk a little bit about the specific flavor profile for Teodoro's.
Yeah, Teodoro's we aim for kind of the same flavor profile all the time. It's one of the coffees that's very, very stable for Nossa. And just so I don't, say anything wrong, it's got a little bit of a smokiness and earthiness to it, kind of like toasted nuts. Maybe toasted almonds would probably be my best guess. There's some chocolate, like little hints of tobacco sort of creeping in on it as well. But mostly caramelly nutty with just a hint of smoke to it.
Yeah, and to be sure, when we're talking about tasting notes, it's just like wine. It's like naturally within the coffee. We're not adding chocolate or not adding anything to the coffee. That's naturally what the terroir and the roasting process brings to this coffee.
If you have a nut allergy, you won't go into anaphylaxis if you try to.
Yeah. So this is our bestseller, and I think it's a bestseller because it's a super balanced coffee. You can enjoy it black, and it's got a bold coffee taste, but it's smooth, so you don't need to have any cream. I love this coffee in the morning with a little bit of cream. It's our go-to in the morning, so it's our bestseller. Yeah.
This little gem has definitely saved me when I've been traveling a lot in the past. Mm-hmm. I stock these when I fly, and especially to countries that don't drink a lot of good coffee. This has saved me every single morning, and especially when I don't have, I can do a little smidge of cream if I'm somewhere that has cream, but if I'm in, Tokyo or Seoul and I don't have that, this is my breakfast. It gets me through. So thank you for making these. I'd never seen them until I got one in a little gift pack that I'd ordered from you a couple of years ago or 18 months ago, and it really saved me. So thank you.
Great. We're going to want pictures of you traveling with that.
Done.
And one fun story, I did brew it once on an airplane because the plane coffee was really bad, so it worked as well. But just careful not to burn yourself. We can go to the next slide. This coffee is an absolute gem. So you can see maybe the caricature. You got this in your box. And this coffee is Timoteo Menas. He goes by Timo. On the bottom left there is me with my son Giovanni harvesting coffee with Timo. And I owe a big debt of gratitude to Rob. Rob peer pressured me into getting into Guatemalan coffee. When he joined us, we were strictly a Brazilian company. Mm-hmm. And the thought was, well, the name is Nossa Familia. I don't like fake or fuzzy marketing. I don't have any familia in Guatemala. But Rob had visited and volunteered in Guatemala. And so we bought a small lot. And so then we decided that as a company, it was more about our adopted familia and treating people like family. And so we've now done 5 tours of Guatemala. We work with a couple co-ops and other farmers. And we actually take people, tourists, to Guatemala every year in January. Had to skip this year, unfortunately. But we go, we harvest coffee, and we have like an authentic relationship where I'm on WhatsApp with Timo, checking in with the crop. So I'll stop there. Actually, on the bottom right, that's Volcan Agua, and Timo's coffee comes from the slopes of that volcano. Rob, I'll let you take it away.
And Timo's up quite high too. Some of his parcels of farm land are at 2,000 meters and higher, which is quite wild. So yeah, I mean, so Timo's is just really, really floral. There's little bits of strawberry notes in there, as well as kind of like a deeper plum or cherry note. And when I heard you had picked out the wines based on some of the coffees, I was like, oh snap, I think I know which one is for that one. But yeah, so it's very floral. It's got a lot of red fruit to it, some brown sugar. It obviously tastes like coffee as well, but you know, at the same time, it's just got a lot more interesting exotic flavors than what people are, I think, used to tasting when they think of coffee. So.
If you are, part of the program here and you like dark roasts, you might not really enjoy this coffee to begin with, because this is a light roast. It's very fruity. It's not what some people think of coffee. And in the beginning, because I used was most of Brazil's coffee, the traditional Brazilian coffee is towards chocolatey and nutty. This was definitely foreign to me, literally. So it's taken a little bit to acquire, but give it a chance. If you really don't like it, feel free to give it away. But this is a really high-end special coffee, and it's the flavor profile really pop out when it's getting closer to room temperature. And this coffee won't do too well with milk. It doesn't do too well with creamer. So try it black. Give it a chance.
Yeah, it is. It's so bright and floral, and it's so transparent almost in its flavor profile, and that's what I sometimes in the early afternoon, you're getting that lull, but when I brew this coffee, it just sort of, it makes me pay attention to it, and it just sort of elevates me a little. And so it's not like my morning coffee where I'm just I need the caffeine and I need something big and chocolatey, and I'm not really thinking about the coffee. But I love sitting with a really fine cup of coffee that is like wine, and I can engage with it like wine. But it wakes me up instead of doing the opposite.
Very good. We can go to the next one so we can keep moving here. So the next coffee we have in the box is our full cycle. And on the right, there's me and my wife at Cycle Oregon. So I am a sucker for cycling. I have too many bikes in the garage, and I love all things with cycling. And the picture on the left is me and Jeff, our COO, at the Community Cycling Center holiday bike drive, where the Community Cycling Center gives away 500 bikes to 500 kids in need. And it's just a beautiful event. Full cycle, I'm just super excited about this coffee. This is like the culmination of what we are and what we represent and what we do as a company. It was the first and one of our primary blends. Most of the coffees, we focus on one origin. With Full Cycle, the name has this dual meaning of like our passion and love for cycling, but also representing the full cycle of our vertical integration from farm to our roastery to your cup of coffee. And so this is a blend. It's always about 50 to 60% from Brazil, from one of my family's farm, and that brings in a really nice body and sweetness. And then the other components is from Central America. And it's a partner of ours from Nicaragua and some of our partners from Guatemala as well. And the Central America will bring the brightness and the fruitiness. So I'll let Rob take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it pretty much on the head. So this one kind of goes more into a savory sort of sweet. So if you think of savory caramels or something with nuts involved in them, it'd be kind of more in that range. There is a little bit of floral, there is a little bit of fruit, and there is a little bit of a positive herbaceous character to it as well.
The profile was designed in part for Portland. We saw a lot of other roasters focusing only on light roast. So we wanted a coffee that would be a really good espresso on its own, that would have not as much as the traditional Italian espresso, but a little bit more of the floral and fruitiness that Portlanders are liking. But we didn't want it to taste sour with milk. Yeah. So there's enough of the Central American in there for the brightness, but the Brazilian still keeps it really balanced, and it goes really great as a latte. So at home, I usually, the three coffees that I most drink are Full Cycle, the Italian roast, and then our Camilla's Organic, which is a similar roast than the Italian. And I'll drink those in the morning. My wife likes a little bit darker coffees also, and I always drink it with cream in the morning. And then in the afternoon is when I'll pull out the Timos or some of the other brighter coffees.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. At least we have the same tasting schedule if I come for coffee, Augusto.
Yeah. We had promised to share a few basic brewing tips. I can't remember if this is a good time or if that's better for later.
We can do that now if you like, and then we can bring up Janie after we talk about the brewing, just in case anyone needs a cuppa right now. Okay. And then we'll get into Janie's story and then tasting some wines.
Great. So I'm just going to touch on a few basics. There's so many different brewing methods, but there's a few universal things that are true. So one is the coffee ratio. So on the side of each bag, you'll see our family recipe here of this 1:16 ratio. So independent of the brewing method you're going to use, whether it's a French press, or actually this doesn't work for espresso. It makes not much sense for espresso, but for pour over, your brewer, the 1:16 is it's a very important ratio. And so the way I do the math is, I use Siri, and I'm like, okay, if I want, a cup of coffee for two people, that's about 500 grams. I go, hey Siri, what's 500 divided by 16? And then it'll tell me how many grams I need to grind.
And that's the water that you're pouring over it, not the resulting water that you want, because the grinds will hold on to some water.
That's right. So 500 grams of water is what I put on. So that's the ratio. Getting close to that ratio will yield better results. The other thing that people take for granted is the grind level. I won't be able to show too well here, but usually for any type of drip coffee making, you want the consistency of something that's more like a table salt. And I think we'll send an email out afterwards, right, to everybody, so we can send more of a photo so people can see. But a coarse table salt is what you'd be looking for a drip coffee. Whereas if you're going for French press, you want it to be coarser because the coffee is immersed in water, so it's extracting for longer. And if the coffee is too fine, you'll extract too much, and then it'll get bitter. So just some very basic tips.
And is temperature important when you're extracting for those different grinds? Yeah.
Yeah, so most of the time when you're looking at water temp, you want something around 200 to 202 Fahrenheit. But that's most of the time we're talking about slurry temperature. And so most of the time people think that, it should be the temperature of what's in my kettle if I'm doing a pour over, but it's actually, you want to probably bring it up to a boil, because by the time you pour it into the slurry, you're going to have lost a lot of temperature. So I usually pour right off of a boil. And it's really difficult to overheat it that way, especially if you're pouring from any height up, you lose a lot of temperature in that pour.
Great, good to know.
Yeah, and Bree, this is an interesting difference of the wine and coffee industry. There's so many similarities. The difference is, as a winemaker, when you're done with this, most people are going to enjoy it as you had intended. And with coffee, we lose that control. And so sometimes we'll get complaints or comments like, this person just needs like a brewing lesson. Or we have no control, so we have to do our best. And so we try to do some coffee education so people can get the most out of their coffee.
That's great. But although you would be surprised, because some people will leave the tasting room and go to another tasting room, and this precious bottle will sit in a car and get really hot, and basically cooked. And then so when you pour it in the glass, it is going to be compromised and cooked basically. There's temperature is important with wine as well, and some heavier wines, or even lighter wines, you can chill down a little bit and they'll bring out more acidity and some of the brighter fruit flavors. And then also glass is important, because depending on the size of the glass that you're drinking out of, when you put it in your mouth and drink it, the wine will actually set on your palate at a different place. So the difference between a champagne flute,
we lost her.
mouthpiece.
You're back.
Oh, I'm back. Is really, really impacts how you.
We're waiting for her to come back.
As well.
What she said is really awesome. There are entire scientific research articles on tasting based on temperature, and that's for coffee as well. And I think that that's just a really, really cool thing, is that most beverages that we drink evolve as they change in temperature, both because the volatile aromatics are different at different temperatures. And so you're getting kind of a different experience altogether. And in addition to that, the way your palate picks things up is different at different temperatures. And so
for the lay people like me, can you explain volatile aromatics?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that we're tasting are really aromas that are getting picked up in our retronasal, which is the part of our nose that's in the back of our throat. And so those compounds are very volatile, they're aromatic, they're coming off. And those are some of the things that we...
No, we lost Rob.
We lost
Don't make me talk about volatile aromatics.
And similar to wine as well, we get those retronasal, volatile perfumes that really come through out in our wine glasses as well. And that's what's really what we're tasting. I was trying to riff off what you were saying along with the volatile aromatics with wine as well. And, that retronasal component is so important. And, we find that some of the, higher acidity, higher elevation wines that we have that's where those florals and volatiles are really more expressive, is coming from those high elevations and bringing those perfumes, which really fill up your retronasal as well.
Maybe we should let you take it on to wine now.
Yeah, let's go into wine. Let's bring up Janie. Thanks, Augusto. Thanks, Rob. We'll talk to you guys in 15 minutes and get you back up here for tasting wine.
Hi.
Hi, Janie. We're starting to get carried away talking about all the components of flavor in wine, and we need to get you up here. And I just loved how many similarities there were between Augusto's family and, his approach to starting this project and, utilizing all of his family members and bringing it back to, I think, of your hill here, and all of the growers that you support and who are like part of the family. You go into the tasting room and they're sitting at the bar having a glass of wine. Well, in pre-COVID times. Yeah. Used to be.
Right now, you have a table.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit how that all began, with Jimmy and with your family out in the valley here?
Yeah, Jimmy, so brother, a year and a half older than I am or was. We grew up in Portland, and he went to school actually in the Willamette Valley at Linfield. Graduated, no idea what he wanted to do for a living, and so he moved to Europe. He bought a one-way ticket and really roamed around, earning money as much as he could to travel more. That was really his goal. And one of the jobs he took was working harvest in Beaujolais, and he did that for all 6 years he was there. And Steve, you can go ahead and bring up the first family slide. My family doesn't go back as many generations for the wine industry, but we do have a special connection for sure. So Jimmy ended up getting married and having a baby back in 1996 when he was still living in Europe, and decided it was time to move his family back to Oregon. And he took a job working in a vineyard in the Willamette Valley at Willackenzie and started his own label back in 1998. And you had mentioned he did bring biodynamic farming back with him and made big efforts there. And he took his son Pascal every day, every weekend they spent in the vineyards and the winery, I love the picture on the bottom right. I always laugh that Jimmy started Pascal really young. I was, of course, appalled when he was 1 year old and Jimmy would put a little wine in his water glass. He didn't give him that much, but enough. And point being, Pascal was involved in the wine industry with Jimmy from the day he was born. That's how he spent his time and his weekends, for sure, with his dad. And in 2004, Jimmy passed away unexpectedly at the age of 38. And amongst a lot of messaging that his peers and colleagues gave to me, one of the thing that really stood out to me was Jimmy had mentioned the only thing he had for his son to leave to him was his winery. And, dial it forward 16 years later, here we are. There's two of us that have kind of stewarded the winery on behalf of Jimmy's son, Pascal, Chris Williams, our winemaker, and myself. So we've been running Brooks for 16 years, really with the intention that when Pascal is ready, he gets to come back and run Brooks. And he's totally followed in Jimmy's footsteps. He moved to Europe after he graduated from college, not knowing really what he wanted to do for a living, but also following his girlfriend, who's from France. And he's lived over there for 2.5 years. And the picture on the top right and the two pictures on the top, both are him working in harvest this past year in Alsace. So it's in his blood, it's in his genes. He's coming home at some point to work in production, that side of Brooks, and we're excited for him to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so funny. I'll every now and then get a message from Pascal on Facebook about some wine that he tried. It is at his wine shop that he's been working in part-time as well when he's not out in the vineyards. And, he's following the same path that Jimmy did with biodynamics and working for really, amazing biodynamic and aromatic grape variety producers in France as well. So I can't wait to see what he brings back and brings to the production team here.
Yeah, I was so amazed this year. Last year, he worked for the producer that Jimmy worked for the 6 years. So there was a connection there. It's a family-run winery, 2 generations, really great. But this year, he emailed me and he was like, I'm going to work harvest again. I said, where? And he's like, oh, this place called Domaine Ostertag in Alsace. And I was like, what? Like, that is one of the most premier producers in Alsace ever. So good for him. He did that all on his own, which is really, really amazing. And I think he intends to continue to do that for as long as that he's living in Europe.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so your journey with Brooks as well, Janie, has really built on and developed the importance of what was important to Jimmy in terms of the biodynamics. You've worked hard to become Demeter certified, which is, you're one of the few wineries in North America whose vineyards and winery are Demeter certified, which is the biodynamic certification. And then you didn't stop there, though. You've gone into other certifications as well. Can you tell us a bit about those as well, and what you contribute to and how the philosophies guide you?
Yeah, and I have to say I love the parallel between Augusto and I, like running these companies. We're not necessarily the ones producing the product, but we are adding our philosophies and values and bringing some very tangible things to make the companies even better. And I love that. And so, certification is very important to me. I think transparency in what you're doing and how you're running your business is really important, especially because everybody loves to use the word in almost every industry now of sustainable. And there's a lot of greenwashing. And so not only do I want to keep myself accountable, I want everyone to really understand what we're doing, whether it be in the vineyard or how we're running our business. So we did get Demeter certified for biodynamics, both in the vineyard and in the winery back in 2013 to really just kind of cement that statement about who we are from a farming and winery practice standpoint. And then we added 2 others in 2019. So B Corp certification that we've talked about a little bit already, but it's really about, how you can use your business as a force for good. And of course, environment's part of it. And because we're biodynamic, that was pretty easy. But the other parts of it really made me become a better employer, because it looks at how you treat your team and how you're paying people and all sorts of different policies and practices around the health and safety of your team and your suppliers. And so that supplier conversation, especially with our growers, because they're our primary suppliers, really has helped to deepen relationships and also get them to convert to some of these other practices when it comes to farming or how they're treating their own teams. So B Corp certification's been amazing. It's an amazing community, great resource. And we're super proud to be part. Portland, I think, has the most active B Corp chapter in the world, which is pretty awesome. So it's definitely an Oregonian mindset too. And with B Corp, there's 3,500 or so companies in the world that are certified. 18 of them or 17 of them are wineries, and 9 of those 17 are in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, which I think, again, goes back to that testament of Oregon is amazing. And then 1% for the Planet, they're actually going to be our partner for our next Beyond Brooks, which we'll talk about at the end. But we donate 1% of our revenues back to an environmental-based nonprofit. And Kiss the Ground is the partner that we're actually working with. And it's a great concept. And the concept is basically that we all, by being on this planet, are taking something from this planet. It was founded by Yvon Chouinard, who founded Patagonia. And he felt like if everybody could just do a little bit, which is 1%, give back 1%, whether you're an individual or a company, we could make the planet a better place and take better care of it. So those are things that I just really wanted to build into the value structure of Brooks so that it is that much more solid when Pascal comes to take over.
Well, and talk about planning, setting yourself up for something when you're, facing a year that brings us both a pandemic and massive wildfires, really having, that structured system and that guidance to support your employees and be that employer that you want, set yourself out to be. That's what a great setup for a year like 2020.
Yeah, and I mean, those are the boundaries that you look at, right? We were closed, for a long time. We were open outdoors only for the last 3 months during the winter in Oregon. I kept my team. Like, it's super important that these philosophies and these certifications really help me guide those decisions. With our growers during the forest fires, I didn't take in any of their fruit, but I paid them at least half of what I would have paid them otherwise, because it wasn't their fault. And I wanted to keep my contracts and I wanted to take care of them. So they are the guiding principles really for all of the decision making that we make at Brooks.
Yeah, and having those relationships is so important to the quality of product, the end product in the glass is what it comes down to as well. So it's a fantastic role model that Pascal has to follow in the footsteps of. So well done. And what is in our wine box today? Well, not wine box, but what is in our wine bottles?
We do. Yeah, Steve, if you want to bring up the map. So we do have our own estate vineyard, but we source from about 28 other vineyards. And we do that so that we can find, again, mission-aligned farmers, but, grapes are as impacted as we've talked about coffee in terms of elevation, in terms of aspect, in terms of a whole bunch of different climatic and geographic elements. And so we really try to go find a whole bunch of different vineyards that can bring that together. So one of the wines that we have is the Johan Vineyard Pinot Noir. This map shows you the Amity Hills, which is kind of that seahorse shaped, which is a hill range. I wouldn't call it a mountain range, in the middle of the Willamette Valley. And there are wineries and vineyards on both sides of it. So we are on the east side of it, facing east. And so we have morning sunlight, which makes a really big difference in terms of the fruit that's grown on our vineyard. And Johan is actually on the west side of those hills, but they are sandwiched in between that and the coastal mountain range. So they get different wind factor from the Van Duzer corridor, which we've talked about, which is a break in the coastal mountain range. They get stronger winds than we do because we're on the other side of those hills. Johan's lower in elevation than we are. They're only 250 feet in elevation. They're also biodynamic and certified as well, which is what we love about them, and younger vines. So they were planted in 2009. So that's the Johan Vineyard Pinot Noir. The second wine is the Caillet Pinot Noir, which is super special. And that was a label that Pascal, actually, we gave him when he turned 21. We said, why don't you create a label? He didn't make the wine, but he wanted to create a label that had a tie back to his dad. So Caillet means notebook in French. And he talks about on the back label, if you read it, that that's really how he's gotten to know his dad, is through his dad's journaling. And so that bottle also came wrapped in excerpts from my brother's journals. That's my brother's handwriting that's on that tissue paper. But for me, what's really exciting about this wine is you all of a sudden tell your winemaker after 20 years, guess what? You get to make something new. This isn't going to be a single vineyard because we already make single vineyards from all our spots. What are you going to come up with? And so what Chris ended up doing is he took one of his favorite clones of Pinot Noir, the 115 clone, and he took that from our estate and then our two neighboring vineyards, the Musca Vineyard and the Crandall Vineyard. Wide range of years of planting, but all volcanic soil. We're all adjacent to each other. We range from 500 to 750 feet in elevation, but it's all a single clone. So it's a lot darker, and we'll get into the tasting of them, but a very, very exciting wine in our portfolio.
Yeah, and I love the similarity. I mean, the similarities in the aspects and soils and grape varieties of these wines, but they are distinctively different wines because of that clonal influence, because of the elevation, and because of the weather impacts that they receive, and the age of the vines as well, and particularly being able to, old vines really become an important conversation when you're in a region that is dry grown, like the Willamette Valley is, or most of the Willamette Valley is, but when you have quite a warm vintage that really, can put stress on young vines when they don't have enough water to get them through the growing season. And grapes can be pretty sensitive to heat fluctuations, and so they will shut down, when they reach above 85, 86 degrees. And so they will shut down, and then it takes them until the evening when things start to cool down for them to come back to life again and start metabolizing all of the sunshine and energy that they've been gathering in their leaves during the day. So part of being in a cooler influenced area like the Eola Amity Hills and Van Duzer Corridor AVA is that the vines aren't impacted as much by these very extreme heat events, which is what we saw in 2017. And then the Brooks and Crannell and Musca vineyards, have that, longer vine planting, and so more established, deeper root systems into the soils. So that's a really important factor in how these wines can bring, or these vines bring more complexity and not stressed vine characters to the wine in hot vintages. And 2017 was one of the earliest bud breaks on record. We'd had a pretty mild winter, and then we did have some, high heat events in the August and July. There was a couple of days of over 100 degrees, and we continue to see the environment, our growing seasons, really, escalating in terms of the heat fluctuations and heat events and temperatures. So it's not just a one-off, event that we're seeing every year a earlier bud break and more heat coming to the region. So it's even more important for us to have these cooling influences that the Van Duzer Corridor brings, and those cool winds and the east facing slopes, Janie, that really protect the pinosity and vibrancy of these wines, of these grapes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting thirsty just talking about these, and I feel like I need to taste because I'm now salivating after talking about the pinosity of these wines. So yeah, shall we bring everyone up to start getting their thoughts on the wines as well? Bring up Augusto and bring up Rob, and we can all talk about the flavor profiles. Augusto just told us earlier before we came onto the seminar that his wife's away for the weekend, so he's bachelor padding it, and you can just see that. So let's start with the Johan wine. And Janie mentioned that they are biodynamic producer as well, but slightly younger vines and lower elevation, both east-facing vineyards that the fruit comes from. But generally speaking, when you're standing here at the Brooks Vineyard, you're usually starting to get some wind coming over the tops of the hill and rushing down through the vines in the late afternoon. You know, by 6 o'clock here in the peak of summer, you still need a sweater. But usually when you're over at Johan in the Van Duzer corridor, because that vineyard is at lower elevation and doesn't have the buffering effect of the Eola Amity Hills to protect it like the Brooks and Cranell vineyards do, we're finding that the Johan vineyard gets hit by these winds a little bit earlier in the day. So you'll be sitting at Johan and the wind starts to barrel down that corridor from the ocean. And what's happening is it's a sort of a vacuum effect or a pulling effect. The center of the valley is heating up after hot days. And so the heat in the center of the valley is starting to suck that cool maritime air down the Van Duzer corridor. And it really hits the Johan vineyard in the mid-afternoon. And what that does is that protects some of the acidity and the freshness of fruit in those vineyards, and it delays the ripening process as well. So even though it's a lower elevation site, you would think that it might be a little riper, but because of the wind influence, it really slows down that ripening, and you'll often be picking the Van Duzer corridor vineyards at the end of the season because of that really delayed, protracted growing season from the ocean influence there. And it's really important. And I find that it really, for me, it really brings out those high-toned cherry notes. And there's also some umami tea leaf notes or sea kelp notes coming through on this wine as well. I don't know what everyone else is getting, but I think you should all, I'm going to ask Rob and Augusto, because they do this for a living as well. And I also want you guys to all put it in the chat as well, what you're tasting.
I mean, I'm absolutely loving it. Some of the notes up front, like it's a very floral wine to me. And I was getting some strawberry, but kind of like a deeper, like overripe strawberry, perhaps, not in a bad way. Some blood orange in terms of like really heavy citrus acidity. Some vanilla, and then grilled watermelon, where it's like watermelon, but it's got some caramelization to it as well. Yeah.
I really like that. Janie, this is a mixed clonal wine, isn't it, from Johan as well? It's not, the Caille is a 115 single clonal material, but the Johan relies a little more on some of the traditional variety or traditional clonal material that was planted here in the Willamette Valley. So Badensville, 777, Pommard, and some of the Dijon clones. So you're getting a mix here of sort of later ripening clonal material and some younger clonal material, some clonal material from Burgundy that ripens earlier and accumulates sugar earlier, which is really helpful when you're in a cool site that ripens at the end of the season. So there was a question in the chat about what the clones were for these two wines. And the Caille, when you smell the Caille, you can smell that it's kind of deeper and more raspberry and denser, and has a lot more structure to it on its nose and palate. Augusto, what do you think about these wines?
You skipped to the other one without asking me about the Johan. And I have
Tell me about the Johan.
tasting notes. Actually, it's always super intimidating to talk about tasting notes with Rob around, because I can't come up with like grilled watermelon. I'm going to tell you how I feel.
You just say whatever comes to your mind, right?
I'm going to tell you how I feel. When I drank Johan, I felt like I was on the corner of the deck at Brooks Winery. The sun is shining. There's a breeze. I'm with my wife. We're enjoying the day out. And then you get a text from a friend with like some really good news. That's how I felt after Johan.
That's a great tasting note. I love it.
I love it. I do too. I think that, one of the things with these two wines, when you look at them side by side, if you do have something light, like a white piece of paper, it's amazing. This is the same winemaker, same vintage. The vineyards are less than 5 miles from each other as the crow flies, but they are dramatically different color. They are different clones, but there's so much that is controlled for. And so what you're really getting here is the difference of place and the difference in those clones. And the colors are so different.
Yeah, you can see that, the vibrant, that darker skin, thicker skin coming from the 115 and the Caille, and that little bit more ripeness. There's a little bit more sweetness of alcohol. There's a little bit more weight on the palate from the Caille, which is that, the slightly earlier ripening 115 clone. What we're seeing in the Johan is the clonal material that was, delivered here or brought here and planted in the mid 60s and early 70s, that came from California, and had come via Switzerland and Burgundy, but it wasn't really, it wasn't the highest quality. It was just what was available. So there's Pommard and there's Wädenswil, which, came out of Burgundy and came out of Switzerland. But then there was a real effort in the 80s to bring clonal material from Burgundy that was reliably earlier ripening. And so the Dijon clones, which is what they're called, which is what 115 is a part of, were a very conscious effort from Burgundian producers and the Dijon University there to isolate clonal material that was reliably going to ripen, accumulate sugar very easily, because when these were created, France had come out of phylloxera, losing their vines to phylloxera, then World War after World War. And so they had to replant their vineyards pretty quickly. And what they replanted with was varieties that were reliable. They had that choice to make. So if the vineyards needed to be replanted, they were being replanted with these Dijon clones because they were reliably going to produce a crop that would give fruit and alcohol that was sufficient for that cool environment in Burgundy. And that's why they were brought to the Willamette Valley, because in the 80s, it was a pretty cool climate here. And people really wanted to have riper styles of wine. And now we're starting to see some move back to some of these heirloom or heritage varieties because they do provide more moderate alcohols. And what we're mostly seeing is that vineyards here are getting old enough that we know which site is best suited to which clonal material as well. So at 50 years of age that the Willamette Valley is, we're finally starting to get an idea of what the best clonal material is for different sites here in the valley.
So one of the things that I've loved that we've done as we've gone through these tastings is kind of the cross, in this case smelling, because not everybody brewed their coffee. All I smell in the Caille is coffee. I mean, they really, and there is such a nice pairing between the full cycle and the Caille.
And for me, I'm excited you said that, because what I was going to say about the Kaye was that it has that savory, sweet sugar brownie tone. I would throw the word dulce de leche out there in terms of like the sugar brownie tone that's in Kaye. It's got that big cherry. It's got the almond extract. And then it's also got this really nice kind of like herbaceous thing going on. I don't know whether it's like a bay leaf, but it's something really nice and aromatic, like bay leaf or sage kind of thrown in there. But it's making me think of your grandmother, Augusto, who fed me so many sweets. I'm not sure why I'm not diabetic, but dulce de leche, that was definitely on the menu.
Okay, so
Bree,
what's your tasting note on this one, on the Kaye? Come on.
I need to come up with that one in a little bit here. But I was just going to say the one thing that's been on my mind hearing Bree talk about, the movements of coffee. It's very similar with, the movement of these plants and varieties or clones. It's very similar with coffee. And I wonder, like, if the people had any idea, the person that decided to take that one plant over, or the one seed, like, did they know what they'd be starting? Yeah. It's just fascinating how things have migrated and evolved, and I just think that's super cool.
And Augusto, there is actually a difference between coffee varieties or coffee clones, right? Between what material you would use to make a premium coffee like Nossa Familia grows, and what is more of a commercial product.
Yeah.
There's so much that goes into it. Well, we probably would need 2 hours while enjoying some Rob's grilled watermelon. I'll talk very quickly here, and then Rob's going to do a presentation on processing. There's so many things that influence the flavor of coffee, besides the terroir and the latitude and the altitude. Then you have the two basic families of coffee, which is the Robusta plant, which grows from sea level up to about 500 to 800 meters. And then you have the Arabica beans. So for a while, it was like 100% Arabica beans. That really means nothing. It just means that it's not Robusta, so you have a better chance of it being better. But very similar to what you're talking about, these wines being from very close to each other and having these wildly different profiles. You can harvest coffee from the same plant or from neighboring plants, and then you can dry it or process it differently, and that'll impart a different flavor. And then you can have coffee that's processed exactly the same, but then Rob can choose to roast both the same coffee differently, and then the roasting process can influence different. So Rob's going to dive into processing here in a little bit. So I'll let the expert talk.
Yeah. Why don't we, I think, Steve, if you want to put up the next slide about wine processing, and I'll hit on that really quick, and Bree, if you want to add anything, and then we'll go into coffee, because there's a lot of different steps in wine processing. Probably the first decision always is picking, and when you're picking, and we do that based on flavor development, not necessarily just on sugar ripeness. And then whether or not you sort, which we do sort by hand. You can see that photo there. We'll go through and we'll take out any clusters that have any forms of rot. We take out any leaves. We take out anything else that might have fallen into the picking bin. But the eyes of the picker is super important, and we have a really great vineyard manager and people who farm our vineyards that do a great job only really giving us great fruit, but people stand there and hand sort that fruit. We destem everything.
And I'm going to interrupt there, Janie, because you can really only do this sorting on, a sorting table on a conveyor belt that comes past you, and you have, 4 sets of eyes, pulling out all of the bunches that may be a little compromised. But you can only do this step if you hand harvest your fruit.
Yeah.
If you send a machine harvester through the vineyard, you can't do any of this. So right there is the first choice you make in the quality landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It goes from this conveyor up to a destemmer where little fingers push the berries through and the stems go to a different bin. So we don't do any fermentation on the stems themselves at this point, which bring in different flavors to the wine. So this is just pure fruit. You can see the row of the fermenters. We keep everything separate. So if we buy Wädenswil and Pommard from Johan, it goes into its own bin. The Wädenswil goes into one, the Pommard goes into another. We don't blend or cross ferment any fruit. We wait until the actual blending process to do that. Throughout fermentation, we do pump overs and different ways to bring the oxygen back into the wine to keep it fresh. Pressing, we have a beautiful new basket press that we're using for Pinot Noir that is very gentle. We're all about gentle extraction of just fruit profiles. So we really try to keep extraction from other means like temperature. We've talked a lot about temperature. We run the coolest possible fermentation temperatures that we can. If you think about simmering versus boiling, you get two products at the end of the day. We are more in the simmer mode, just warm enough to get the fruit to ferment fully. And then barrel aging. Both of these wines were aged for over 18 months in barrel. They both have about the same amount of new oak, brand new barrels, in part a little bit more oak profile. The longer you have them, the less they do. And after about 5 years, you're really just using barrels as a vessel. But caring for the wine in barrel for 18 months is a very, very labor-intensive process, and very, very important. So we use all French oak barrels as well. And then we get into the blending process, which that's really, the team's just finishing the 19 single vineyard wines right now, and there's no formula. So everything is tasted on its own for its own individuality, and it is decided at that time whether or not we'll make 50 cases of a Johan or we'll make 120 based on the quality of the product. So it's all kind of hand selected and hand pulled from the different barrels for all those decisions to go into all the different wines.
And the age and the toasting level of the barrel that you're putting the wine into, that's where you're often getting some of these more coffee-like flavors coming from, because depending on the toast level of the barrel and how new the barrel is, the more of that toasted oak and caramelization of oak sugars you're going to impart into the wines. So when you talk about vanillin or chocolate or mocha or coffee bean notes, that's mostly coming from the roasting level of a new barrel.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I have the tasting notes for the Cahier when you're ready.
Oh, yes.
Excellent.
Let's go back to the main screen, Steve, and then we'll dive into Rob's slides for processing coffee.
So I took another sip of this, and it was rather a large sip, and like the sweetness was like, wow, life is sweet. And then it was fun. It's just a fun wine. And it took me back to water sliding with my kids. So my parents visited in 2018, and we got on a road trip to go to Yellowstone, and we stopped by Silver Mountain or Silverwood Park, and they have roller coasters and water slides. So thank you for that memory. This is a fun and sweet wine, just like life.
Great.
What's your tasting notes, Rob?
I already gave it on these, but in terms of life, I don't know, just a warm summer day, slight breeze, sunshine.
Yeah. Any grilled things that we can associate with this one?
No, this one for me is all dulce de leche and floral and cherry and all of that sweetness. It's dope. Both of them are really good.
Awesome. All right, Rob, walk us through processing coffee.
Yeah, so coffee processing is a really big step, and I'll kind of start by saying coffee's got some weird stuff going on with it. So on the one hand, it's very, very similar to wine in the fact that we are influenced by terroir, we are influenced by variety choice or cultivar choice. We're probably more heavily influenced by processing than we are cultivar choice. And the cultivar in different terroir can make a huge difference. So one of the weird bits about coffee is like everything was government regulations in terms of producing countries for a very long time. And so what people got used to was, oh, a Colombian coffee tastes like this. Oh, a Sumatran coffee tastes like this, or that sort of thing. Or Brazil tastes like this. And as the governments have deregulated, and as we've started getting smaller producers actually making their way to market without being blended with everything else, what we found is that like a Colombian coffee can taste like what you used to associate an African coffee tasted like. Mm-hmm. And you can have a Sumatran coffee that tastes just like it was grown in Guatemala. And so there's this like great deal of cross flavor profiles. And part of that too is in coffee, it's the Wild West. Like people are literally smuggling cultivars to each other, kind of illegally sometimes. The country has a lockdown on a particular cultivar that it's developed. No, that's everywhere. So you've got Kenyan varieties in Central America. You've got Castillo, which is a Colombian developed variety that's finding its way all over the world, despite Colombia claiming it as its own exclusively. You've got farmers talking and sharing processing methods. And so one of the great things about coffee is that it used to be you could maybe like have a tasting and say like, oh, this is from this country, this is from this country, this is from this country. Now you're constantly surprised by what you're getting in terms of flavor, which is, in my mind, kind of fabulous. But
sounds like the wine industry, Rob, really does.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I know in Europe stuff can be a little bit more on lockdown, but I know the U.S. people experiment like crazy, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
And so like even one of the farms that we work with, I won't say who, but they even talked about like going into a farm that a government had repossessed at night and looking for varieties and taking varieties from that farm and replanting them in their own farm so that they weren't lost, that sort of thing. So lots of cool stuff like that. But in terms of processing, we'll just break it down really simply into a couple of, there's really 3 different processing methods that happen within coffee farming. The first is the most natural. It's the most common. It's the way people used to do it. And that's called natural process. We're really good with the terminology. It used to be dry process, but then dry process got kind of the connotation of low quality. And so they did a rebranding and called it natural process, which is great. So basically all they do is they let the coffee dry in the fruit. And so coffee is, with wine making, you're pulling the grapes and then you're popping the seeds out and everything and using the fruit. With coffee, it's the opposite. We're actually discarding the fruit and keeping the seeds, and that's what we're using to roast. And so there's usually 2 seeds that grow inside of each fruit. You will have occasions where if you see something called a pea berry, basically means that one of the seeds took over both cavities, and so you've got one smaller round, fully round and ovular seed inside. That's the only real difference with pea berry is just kind of how it grew there. But with natural process, what they do is they dry it inside the fruit. And so that gives you a longer drying time. And so you've got different enzymes and bacteria and yeasts that are present in the environment and present inside the cherry from when it was a flower that are causing changes to the sugars inside of the fruit as it's drying. You also have metabolic changes in the seed as the seed thinks, hey, I'm going to be able to grow into a plant here. Everything's kind of going along like normal. So you have some of these changes that happen, and the unfortunate thing is that people claim that the fruit absorbs into the seed and that's why it tastes more fruity. That's not necessarily the case. But natural processed coffee does tend to be fruitier. And so they tend to be these great coffees for people that are involved in or wanting to get involved in specialty coffee, because sometimes we'll say these esoteric tasting notes and people are like, I don't get it. It kind of tastes like coffee. With a natural, you're like, holy crap, that tastes like strawberries. I get it. I finally understand what's happening here.
Yeah, and that's the picture on the top left is a natural. So it was bright red or yellow, and then now it's getting to this uniform brown. That's the beans or the seeds are drying in there.
Mm-hmm.
How long does that process take, Rob?
So natural process, depending on the climate where you're drying, can take up to a month for drying, maybe even a little bit more depending. So it is all kind of variable. In terms of how much sun they're getting, if they're drying it on the farm at altitude versus if they're drying it in a collected station lower in the valley where there's a little bit more heat. So it can be a bit variable. But yeah, it tends to be significantly longer.
It also varies dramatically whether you're using a mechanical dryer. Mm-hmm. So what Rob was alluding to was people that are just sun drying or using these raised screens. And with mechanical dryers, there are these huge things that fit a few tons of coffee, and they're pumping air at just above room temperature, and that's accelerating the process. And some of our coffee is dried that way, and that process is faster, so the natural won't be as exotic as this longer term natural process that Rob's talking about.
Yeah. The dryers are usually somewhere between 50 and 60 C, which is a little bit over 100 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But they're awesome. They sound like the ocean. They're just kind of slowly turning and tumbling. So but that does tend to be natural processed coffee, and it depends a lot too on what's available, what cultivar you're using, whether you get the fruitiness and stuff like that too, and what altitude it's planted at, because it depends a lot on your starting conditions, like what you have chemically present to start. The bottom left here is what's called honey processed. There's no honey, so if you're vegan, honey processed, totally cool. It's a rebranding effort on the part of Costa Rica. That's just a joke that some of my friends in Brazil tell, because in Brazil they have had this for a very long time. It's called pulp natural there. And in pulp natural processing, what they do is they remove the fruit from the outside, but they do nothing to remove the fruit pectin layer that's attached to the outside surface of the seed.
Huh.
And so that fruit pectin layer then dries on the outside of the seed, and depending on how often you turn it and how cleaned it has been, you end up getting a darker coloration on the outside, which looks like honey is dried on the outside. And sometimes it even looks like granola when you have to break granola apart. You will have to sometimes come through and hit it to break them apart to send them through the huller. This is the kind of medium length drying time. And it is also kind of, depends. So if you see someone write black honey, then there's a lot of fruit material dried on the outside. Then there's red honey, yellow honey, and white honey. And all of them are varying levels of fruit material dried on the outside. So you have the whole gamut. You could have a honey processed coffee that tastes crazy wild like a natural. You could have a honey processed coffee that tastes mild and sweet and straightforward like a washed, which is one of the ones we'll talk about next. So honey process is basically just like we're letting it dry with the fruit pectin layer on the outside of the parchment skin. And it can mean a lot of things in terms of flavor, but it just means that it's gone through a pulping process before drying.
Okay.
Then if you go on to do washed processed coffee goes through a pulping machine just like honey, but then it's set into fermentation tanks, and that's what you see at the top right. And so what they're doing is they're actually allowing the yeasts that are present in that local environs to break down the sugars in the fruit pectin layer on the outside of the parchment skin so that it separates from the seed. And so usually about 8 to 16 hours, depending on temperature, and it can be wet or dry fermentation. So dry fermentation is just a pile of coffee seeds. Wet fermentation, it's submerged in water. And basically the yeast present break those down, and you know they're ready. And the coffee industry has a lot of people that have figured out how to do things with very low budgets, because coffee farming is usually done by people that are still kind of feeling the effects of colonialism in different parts of the developing world, unfortunately. And so it can be as advanced as you have a sensor that tells you when you've hit the right pH. It can be as non-advanced as I have a wooden stick and I shove it in there and pull it out. And when I pull it out and there's no seeds on it, it's just slime, then we're super solid, good to go. So it can be kind of anywhere within that gamut. And it goes from like fully mechanized places that have mechanical pickers that are doing everything, irrigation systems that are making sure everything ripens all at the same time, to a smallholder who basically has a few trees in their backyard that goes through 5 times a year picking as the fruit ripens and processes it all in their backyard. So it's like the whole spectrum exists within coffee.
One quick add-on here. So in my family's farm in Brazil, most of the coffee is dried for 2 to 3 days in the sun, and then it goes into a mechanical dryer, where they use machinery and technology to figure out the moisture content. There's a risk of over drying the coffee, because then you'll lose some of its freshness and brightness, and the farmer will lose money as well, because they sell it by weight, right? So there's, but if you leave it too moist, then it could get moldy in transport. So there's this really like 11 to 12% range, and Rob can speak more to that.
Actually, even lower.
Yeah. But I remember first time I visited Nicaragua, we were walking by the drying tarps. They put the coffee in tarps, whereas in Brazil, it's all in tar or cement. But that's really expensive to have, a football field size of like tar and cement. So in other countries, they put tarp and then they put the coffee in. If the rains come in, they cover it. And I asked our friend, okay, how do you, like, what do you use? What equipment do you use for moisture? And then he's like, oh, it's easy. So he picks up some beans, he puts it between his hands, and he crunches it with his hands. And he's like, yeah, this is not ready yet. So, our human ability, similar with taste and palate, like they can tell the moisture by crushing the coffee in their hands and figuring out.
Or the bite test. That's the way Julio does at La Armonía, is you bite down on the seed, and if the seed cracks too dry, if it's squishy, it's still a little bit too moist. If you bite down on it, it's like you're biting a rock and you get nowhere with it, then it's right. You're good to go. Yeah.
That's what we do for ripeness of grapes as well. Crunch down on the seeds. If it's still green and bitter, you don't pick it. Yeah.
So then after the fermentation process and the fruit pectin layer has removed itself, or rather the yeast has removed it, they will then take these and they'll rinse them very thoroughly. Depending on where you're at, they may use rinsing channels. They might just wash them with water. And then it's basically just the coffee seed in the parchment skin, which is the protective coating on the outside, set out to dry. And that's what you see in the lower right-hand picture here. This is at La Armonía Hermosa, which is right outside of Antigua and Santa Maria de Jesus, and they're just drying on tarp. And that's one of the rakes that they use to just turn the coffee. You have to turn it multiple times a day to make sure that it dries somewhat evenly. This is the Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel. So this is developed by the Specialty Coffee Association. And so we used to have the Specialty Coffee Association of America and Europe and various other countries. They went through a merger, and around about the same time the merger happened, they went from the old Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel to the new one. And this is the new one. It's available on their website. But with coffee, we have a very similar range of flavors that you would experience with wines or with anything else. It's kind of like as soon as you get involved in something, you realize it doesn't taste like what you talk about it. So like when we talk about winey notes, we mean wine as a generic sense. When someone in wine says this tastes like coffee, they mean coffee in a generic sense. And sometimes we'll find ourselves staring at this wheel for a long period of time trying to figure out how to describe how coffee tastes, only to realize that it just tastes like coffee. And we're having the hardest time putting our finger on it because we're looking for something a little bit more esoteric. It's like, oh crap, this coffee actually just tastes like coffee. That's great.
I'm going to pause you here really quick, Rob. I want to make sure you leave enough time for roasting. And for everybody here, Rob, about a year and a half after he's joined us, he's like, hey, I've been thinking of writing a book on roasting. Is it okay if I use our lab and roaster for some research on it? Of course. So Rob published this book. It's ultra coffee geekery called Modulating the Flavor Profile of Coffee Through Roasting. So it's not a romantic book about roasting. It's literally like some very specific reactions and how to affect flavor. And Rob has sold over 10,000 copies of this book. It's been translated into 4 or 5 languages. And Rob is actually famous worldwide in coffee roasting. And so, Rob, start talking to us about some roasting.
Okay, fair enough. You are too kind. It's a very nerdy book, and it will put you to sleep pretty easily. So, roasting. So we've got some pictures here of coffee roasting, and coffee roasting is just basically a sugar browning process. We go through 2 major sugar browning reactions. So there's the Maillard reaction, and there is sugar caramelization. And it happens a lot faster than most people think. So coffee roasting, generally speaking, happens somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes, end to end. So we preheat the roasters like you would preheat an oven to bake cookies. We preheat ours to somewhere around 490 degrees Fahrenheit. We then drop the coffee into the roaster, and we push the burner up, and we are controlling both the burner at various stages to kind of change the rate at which we're moving through different chemical reactions to cause certain flavors to come out or not to come out. And then we are aiming for certain end temperatures which are relative to end colors, which help us then understand a little bit more about the roast level that we're going to be hitting and what flavors kind of are coming out there. So the top right, you can kind of see it going through that sugar browning reaction. So it starts out green. As the surface starts to lose moisture content, it starts to turn palish green. And then from pale green, we can actually see yellowing start to happen. Mm-hmm. Yellowing happens as a result of the Maillard reaction starting. And so we've got high molecular weight compounds called melanoidins, which are just developing, which is kind of what you're starting to see pick up here. Maillard reactions kind of help you get that sugar browning, those caramel notes, some of the sweet notes, some of the bitterness is due to the Maillard reaction as well that we rely on in coffee for balance. Body or weight of mouthfeel, which is just something that's really funny. We can talk about that later. In our industry, we all use the same term, but unlike wine, we haven't developed a knack for tasting it the same way. So if you asked a whole bunch of different professional coffee tasters to describe body, we would all use the exact same words. You put 10 coffees in front of us and we each pick a different one as having the heaviest body. And a friend of mine in Copenhagen has done scientific studies on this to show that we don't know what the hell we're talking about when it comes to coffee. So, however that works for you is great. But so basically we go through all this sort of stuff, and you can see down here's a picture of me pulling the trier. We have a little trowel that we stick into the coffee where we're smelling for different changes. There are still things that are really important to do based on smell, sight, sound, and those kind of more sensorial-oriented things. We do use data loggers as well to make sure that we're tracking all of the temperature probes, which we're usually monitoring about 4 at a time. Bean temperature, the incoming air temperature, the outgoing air temperature, and the stack temperature. So we're keeping track of all of that. We're monitoring the rate of temperature change on the beans, all that sort of thing. Yeah, we're looking at, but we're also still pulling the trier and looking at the beans, right?
Bree, one of the fascinating things to me about the wine and coffee industry, and this is a big difference, right? As a winemaker, like you make some decisions today, and you're only going to see the results a year or 2 years later. So this is a difference. There's so many similarities. This is a difference. Like in 10 minutes or 12 minutes, Rob will do his magic. It is similar that it's once a year harvest. There's a few countries that do twice a year, but most coffee is once a year harvest. So it is a year-long process of curating the coffee, figuring the profiles we want. But the roasting is fast. It's a lot different.
And I can taste it after 24 hours, which, if you're impatient, coffee's great.
Yeah.
Beer making where you got to wait like a month, or wine making where you've got to wait a lot longer.
I'm super jealous that you get to do this so frequently, because I get to write down my list of ideas and R&D that I want to do on a wine or on a variety, and I've got one shot at it. So, and then I have to wait until next year. So
that is one of the advantages for sure.
I think this explains a lot why our winemaker is a coffee addict.
And there's a lot of great crossovers and a lot of great similarities. Like coffee, when it comes to growing, altitude is huge. The higher the altitude, typically speaking, the more sugar content you're going to expect, and the more sugar content and the more organic acid content. And so, if I'm giving quick tips to people, it's basically like, hey, if you're looking for a coffee that's low acid, you need to go low altitude.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a coffee that's high acid, you go higher altitude.
Yeah. Same
absolutely.
For us. Yep.
Same thing with
looking at the time here.
Natural processes can be really vinegary and bright and really fruity. And if you don't like fruity acidic, then you need to go with washed, right? So
yeah.
Should we start looking at some of the questions?
Yeah. So let's. Oh, there are so many questions.
Let's do a couple, and then we'll do what we've done with other ones, where we'll send a Google Doc to Augusto and Rob too, and you guys can give us your answers, and that will go out in the email with the recording, links to your book, Rob, links to the website.
Nobody wants to read that book. I'm just going to tell you. You don't need to put a link in there.
I don't know, Augusto, you need to write a book about your best wine and coffee tasting notes. Might be the antithesis of Rob's book, right?
Yeah.
So maybe let's just do a couple, because we've lost a few people and we have time in the lounge.
Cool, let's do it.
So there's a couple that have the most votes. What's the recommendation to store the coffee beans once the bag has been opened?
It's a ticking time bomb. So once you've broken into the bag of coffee, you've got probably within a month from the roast date to enjoy it at a reasonable amount. Basically, coffee doesn't go bad. So you might get oxidation of oils, and so it might taste a little rancid, which wouldn't be ideal. But for the most part, coffee is shelf stable. That being said, as you lose carbon dioxide, because it will continuously off gas, so as you lose carbon dioxide, you lose the volatiles, which is why we're paying for specialty coffee in the first place, is some of those aromatics. So I would try and use it within a month.
Great.
Yeah, we're setting up a subscription service with our coffee, and really we're recommending the best value to save on shipping but still get fresh coffee is to get shipments every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You can do it every month, and that's fine as well. But weekly, I think the specialty industry has oversold the freshness thing. So some people are very concerned about getting coffee that was roasted 3 days ago, and that's not necessary. Within a month, you still get a really good flavor and aroma. After that, the aroma is the first thing to go, so it's not as enjoyable when you grind it. But again, like Rob said, you could drink coffee that's a year old. It's not going to make you sick. It's just not going to be as pleasant.
That is not the case for wine. So if you open these wines, drink them within the next 48 hours. Yeah.
I'm working on it.
That's Augusto asked me that earlier. I just looked at him. I said, no, there's no preserving. We just drink them.
There's actually two questions too, if I could answer together, both from Gene Wallace. So he's asking about Washed Timoteo being darker than the medium roast. Can you explain? And also asking about roast levels in general, which is really kind of combo together. So the reason that Timo's looks darker than our medium is all about sugar content. If you have sugars, they brown. If you have less sugars, they don't brown. And since the medium roast full cycle is primarily Brazil, which is lower altitude, it has a lower sugar content. So even though it's a darker roast, it's actually not as dark coloration-wise, which one year we had a light roast Kenya that was actually darker than our French roast, which was really not what you would expect. But it was 410 degrees versus 450.
What about a blonde roast?
So blonde roast is just Starbucks' way of saying light, but their light is probably closer to our Italian flavor. So it is, and this is a great segue, Bree, because it's really like, what's French, what's Italian, what's all this sort of stuff. Meaningless names, unfortunately.
You just insulted like millions of people in Europe.
But so on the East Coast, actually, French and Italian are flip-flopped. So on the East Coast, Italian is darker than French, and on the West Coast, French is darker than Italian.
Huh.
But they're basically people's conceptualizations of how certain countries prefer to drink their coffee, and nothing more. And so, usually speaking, like for us, Italian means dark, and French means darker. But it's all variable, and that's the same thing. Unfortunately, within the coffee industry, the only sure thing that we have, which isn't consumer friendly, is the Agtron scores, which are basically a set of color scores that are based on a color measurement taken by a ultraviolet light reader. But they don't really help as much for people. So usually companies will just say light, medium, and dark. Or if you go beyond dark, then it's French and Italian, or Italian and French, depending.
And so a couple of things here. I remember in the early years, I was at a supermarket doing a demo, and I'm like, do you want to try some coffee from my family's farm in Brazil? This is our Italian roast. I'm like, wait. You said Brazil, but like Italian, what's going on? And I'm like, well, they don't actually grow coffee in Italy and France. And they're like, what? They don't? And I'm like, yeah, so they're known for the roasting style, which is interesting. So it is confusing. What I tell people when people are asking is, in general, if you like a darker coffee, a French and an Italian you'll likely enjoy. There's this weird thing where West Coast, the French roast is darker, East Coast, Italian roast is darker, but there is no standard. So a Starbucks French roast is going to be what we would consider ashy and charred. And so you have to get to know the roaster, and then there should be some consistency with the roaster that you're working with or purchasing.
And can you bust this myth for me, if it is a myth? Is lighter roast coffee higher in caffeine?
So
I'm so excited.
I love this question. It's because two people ran two different experiments that had different outcomes. And so what happened was there was one science experiment that was done where they measured with a volumetric scoop to do the brewing. And when you measure with the volumetric scoop, light roast doesn't swell as much. And so you can have 30% growth from the green coffee size, whereas with dark roast coffee, extremely dark, you can have 100% growth. The volume. So you hold less coffee in the same scoop of a dark roast than you do a light roast. So in that instance, what they found was that the light roast had more caffeine. Now, they did another one with scale, and because dark roast coffee loses more weight due to moisture loss and volatile loss, you can have like 100 grams of dark roast is more coffee beans than 100 grams of light roast. And so in that experiment, they found that dark roast has more caffeine, but the caffeine change is actually negligible. So the bottom line is more coffee, more caffeine.
It's really interesting. You get the same coffee, and we have weight loss when we're producing, right? So you start with 100 pounds of coffee. If you're doing a light roast, you're going to end up with maybe 87 pounds of coffee. If you do a French roast, you're going to end up with 82 pounds of coffee. But the darker you roast, the more you're expanding the bean. And so a French roast actually takes more space in the bag. So a French roast bag will look a little bit larger, and the beans will look larger, even though it's the same.
Well, that's similar in wine when you have, when you're making your picking decisions, you have, in your fruit contracts, if you go over this level of ripeness, then you're going to pay more money for your per ton price because you've got dehydration and higher alcohol levels due to dehydration. So yeah, that's a funny parallel again.
Absolutely.
What other questions do we have on here? Janie, any that you're seeing?
I mean, we've hit quite a few of them.
So elevation is more important than soil type. I don't know if that was relating to...
that was coffee.
That was coffee?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, elevation does play a huge role. Soil type plays a big role too. It's just because of the lack of monetary incentive for farmers, there's been a lot less studies that have been done in coffee. There have been some, and soil type does play a role, but it's not something that's as widely disseminated in our industry as in others. And so most of the times you may not even know what the soil type is because if it's coming from a larger collective group, like in Guatemala, it's mostly like volcanic soil. In Brazil, it's volcanic, but it's also more clay. And so you do have some differences here and there.
But nothing.
Yeah. So altitude, processing method, and cultivar usually are the bigger ones.
Nice.
That's great.
Nice.
Shall we leave the rest for the Google Docs, Janie, and shall we jump into the lounges? And anyone with burning questions can jump into Rob or Augusto's lounge.
Yeah.
Before we go, a couple quick things. One, hopefully we'll get back to doing this annual Guatemala trip, and we love taking people to. We tell people it's not a 5-star tour. We stay in some pretty humble places. We eat with the farmers. We harvest with them. It's awesome. And so hopefully we get back to that next year. And then can we do like a coffee and wine harvest day? We'll brew the coffee, then we'll harvest wine.
Yeah, let's do that.
We already have that covered in the chat that we're doing a wine and coffee trip.
Sweet.
We already have some of our trip people on this on the webinar, and we've already talked about it. So we got to figure that out.
Sign me up. I'm not missing out on that. That sounds like heaven to me.
Amazing.
Sweet. Cool.
Yeah, and make sure if anyone that goes to the lounges for Rob and Augusto, they also have the coffee club. We talked a little bit about the subscription, but we'll put all that information in the Google Doc tomorrow too, for sure. It's been amazing. Amazing.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
thanks so much. Talk about knowledge bombs. It's amazing. Yeah.
You know what I love? There's still 50 people on the call. So we've lost a couple because they had prior commitments. But interest level, everybody's still here. So I'm sure everybody is excited to get to the lounges. So I want to thank the three of you. Big, amazing. I love it. I've learned so much today. So excited. A lot of people who are repeating. Beyond Brooks people have been putting in the chat that this has been our best yet. And that all, Augusto and Rob, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Super fun.
Thank you. So we will see you shortly in the lounge, and I will finish up here and meet you there. So huge thanks again to the whole team, Amelia and Julie. Hopefully you're going to join us in the lounges as well. You can pick which one you go to, but you've been instrumental also in making this happen. Next up, we have on April 10th, we are going to do an event with Kiss the Ground. So if you remember, we donate to 1% for the planet, and we get to direct where those funds go to. So a couple of years ago, we partnered with Kiss the Ground. They are a company in Los Angeles that is an education-based company about farming and appropriate farming, and what that does to our environment and our own personal health, as well as to the health of the food that we eat. And they have a documentary that came out called Kiss the Ground last September. And so before the next Beyond Brooks, the night before, we are doing a movie night, a watch party of the Kiss the Ground documentary with wines that we have made for Kiss the Ground that have private labels from Kiss the Ground on them. Partnering also with Quinn, who makes popcorn, natural popcorn. So they are also part of 1% for the Planet. So that is going to be a great, great event. So it'll be a twofer. We're going to have a watch party movie night, and then we will be with Ryland, who is the owner of Kiss the Ground, the founder, and also was the producer of the movie, will be our special guest for our next Beyond Brooks, which is on April 10th at 1 o'clock. So excited to see you all there. And then let's talk about the lounges. So we're going to go, here, let me, to the lounge. So what you're going to want to do is I have to open the doors first. So there's going to be a couple minute delay. I have to come out of the green room where I am now and off the stage, open the lounges. We will open them up for an hour. There are 4 of them. There's one for me. There's one for Bree. There's one for Rob. There's one for Augusto. Pick where you want to go. You're welcome to pop in and out. It's a limit of 16 people per, but we can continue the conversation, which has really, really been amazing. Thank you again. It just fills my heart to develop relationships through this program. And I just feel so much connection, Rob and Augusto, to both of you, and to Julie as well from your team, and look forward to doing a lot more fun endeavors together. So with that, I will say goodbye, and we will see you in the lounge.